Good evening and welcome to Crawley Borough Council's Planning Committee meeting of the 7th of December 2020. I'm Jonathan Purdy and I chair the Planning Committee. The agenda for this meeting has been published and is available on the Council website. The committee will be committing 5 planning applications this evening and I propose to deal with these in the order that they appear on the agenda. As of course, most will know, with our virtual meetings going at the moment, this is a meeting being held in public and not a public meeting. There are unfortunately no in-person speaking rights at this virtual planning committee. However, members of the public and ward councillors wishing to make representations on the applications have been given the opportunity to submit written statements in advance of the meeting. Any statements will be read out to the members of the committee by the Democratic Services Officer. Can I ask the officers supporting the meeting to introduce themselves, giving their name and job title? Thank you.
Ms Matthews, Democratic Services Officer.
Jess Stampton, Democratic Services Support Officer.
Linda Saunders, Planning Solicitor, Advisor to the committee.
Good evening, my name is Clem Smith. I'm the Head of Economy and Planning for Crawley Borough Council.
Good evening, I'm Jean McPherson, I'm the Development Control Manager.
Hello, I'm Mark Robinson, Principal Planning Officer in Development Management.
Hello, I'm Dimitra Angelopoulou, Senior Planning Officer.
Thank you very much. Before I invite members of the committee to confirm their attendance, could I please ask them to ensure that their mobile phones are switched off or on silent, their backgrounds are plain or nondescript, and that hopefully they will not be disturbed during the meeting. Committee members are reminded that they should have their microphones turned off unless speaking and their cameras turned off unless they are speaking or requesting to speak. When asked to speak, please turn your camera on, unmute yourself and pause for 3 seconds to allow for the slight delay in connection. With this in mind, committee members are asked to be aware of who they will follow in the voting process and be prepared accordingly. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Have we received any apologies for absence, please?
We haven't received any apologies, Chair.
Thank you very much. We will now be taking introductions together with items 2, 3 and 4 at the same time. When I ask members of the committee to turn on their cameras, can I please ask them to confirm the ward that they represent, if they have any declarations of interest to make, if they have any lobbying declarations to make, if they agree with the minutes of the Planning Committee held on the 3rd of November 2020, and if they have visited the site of any of the applications. Would the Democratic Services Officer please call the roll? Thank you.
Councillor Ashcroft.
Good evening, Councillor Liam Ascoff for Gossip's Green and North East Broadfield. I have no declarations of interest. I can say that I have been lobbied on item number 9. I was not at the last meeting, so I can't say anything about the minutes. And I have visited the site in item number independently.
Thank you. And Councillor Andrew Belbin.
Good evening. I'm Councillor Andrew Belbin, representing Pound Hill South and Worth. I have no declarations of interest to make. I have been lobbied on agenda item 9. I've made independent visits to all the items on tonight's agenda, and I agree with the minutes of a previous meeting of the 3rd of November. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Irvine. Sorry, Councillor Irvine, just unmute yourself, please.
Gets me every time. Yeah, Councillor Ian Irvine, Councillor for Broadfield Ward. I have no declaration of interest to make. I agree with the minutes of the previous meeting. I have been lobbied on item 9, and I have no declaration of interest.
Councillor Jaggard.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Kim Jaggard from Maiden Bower. I have no declarations of interest. I have been lobbied on item 9. I approved the minutes of the last meeting, and I have visited the site for items 5, 6 and 9. Thank you.
Councillor Magali.
Good evening, Maureen Maguire, Tilgate. I have no declarations to make. I have been lobbied on item 9. I have done independent visits on item 5 and 9. I agree to the minutes.
Councillor Pickett.
Good evening, Michael Pickett. I'm one of the councillors for Southgate Ward. I'm familiar with.
Sorry, just bear with us, Councillor Pickett. You seem to have been muted. Could you please unmute yourself and repeat yourself? Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Right, I'm Councillor Michael Pickett. I'm familiar with the site as I live about 100 yards or so from it for the last 33 years.
Thank you. And did you agree the minutes, please?
I do indeed, yes.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Purdy.
Thank you again. Good evening again. Jonathan Purdy, representing Three Bridges and the town centre. I have no declarations of interest to make. I have been lobbied on item 9. I made independent site visits to agenda items 7 and 9, and I approve the minutes of the last meeting held on the 3rd of November 2020. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rana.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Rana and I represent Broadfield. I haven't done any site visits. I agree, I have no declarations to declare. I agree to the minutes held on the 3rd of November. I think that's about it. Thank you.
Councillor Sharma.
Good evening. I'm Councillor Raj Sharma, representing Ward of Southgate. I have no declaration of interest apart from that I'm the councillor for item 7 in Southgate. I've been lobbied on item 9. I agree on the minutes of the 3rd of December. Yep. And I have independently visited 5, 7 and 9.
Thank you. And Councillor Peter Smith.
Thank you. Good evening. Councillor Peter Smith, representing Ifield and Ifield West. I've got no declarations of interest. I've been lobbied on item 9, and I've previously independently visited items 5, 7 and 9, and I approve the minutes of the 3rd of November. Thank you.
Thank you. And for record purposes, we have Simon Bagg, the Legal Services Manager, who is present in the meeting. We also have Councillors Flack and Burrett, who are present but have no speaking rights.
Thank you very much. The committee agrees that the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of November 2020 are an accurate record of the meeting. Planning applications. We will now move on to the planning applications, beginning with agenda item 5, planning application CR/2019/0646/ADV, The Tree, 103 High Street, Northgate, Crawley. Please can the planning officer introduce the report to the committee? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for signage for the Crawley Museum at the Tree at the western end of the boulevard. The advertisement consent application that I'll first present comprises 3 signs. There is some individual letters at sign 2. There's a sign against the wall at 1 by the entrance, and there's a standalone small monolith sign at 3 by the ramp into the actual building. I'll just show each of the signs. So sign 1 by the entrance of the building is on the modern glazed extension. It comprises a green sign with the words Crawley Museum and a tree at the bottom. As you can see, it extends over 2 stories, but it's a relatively modest sign in scope of the overall scale of the building. It's on a modern part of the building. It's considered appropriate to its context. It will improve and provide more permanent signage to the building. Sign 2, which is to be located on the west-facing elevation on the more historic part of the building, as you can see, comprises of black individual letters mounted on a stainless steel line. This is designed so that there are minimal points of contact with the sign and the building to ensure that the historic integrity of the building is not affected by the signage. They would stand slightly proud of the building itself, but they're considered to be of a traditional design, relatively modest overall given the overall size of the building, appropriate to their context, and provide much needed advertising for the building from this elevation. Sign 3, which is already in situ, is a small totem sign at the entrance. This is details of what it appears. It's about 1.5 meters high. And this is a montage of what it would look like. If we go back, as we can see on this photograph here, this sign has already been installed. It's very different to the other signs. It's really outside of the main curtilage of the building and stands alone. It has the modern part of the building as the backdrop, and therefore its modern, more contemporary design is considered appropriate to its context. The application is therefore recommended to be granted consent on the basis of what's been submitted. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. There have been no statements submitted by the members of the public on this item, so the committee will move to discussion. I'm sure everybody knows the procedure. If you would like to speak, please turn on your camera and you will then be invited to speak one by one by the Democratic Services Officer. When you're called upon, please unmute yourself and wait for your name to be highlighted in red before speaking, and please turn off your camera once you're finished and no longer live. So we'll now begin consideration. Please turn on your cameras if you wish to speak. Thank you. It looks as if we have no questions from the members of the committee on that item. We will therefore move to the vote. Mike, did you wish to speak?
Sorry.
No. Sorry. So the recommendation is to consent. I will move the recommendation, as is the norm, and I will be asking Councillor Raj Sharma, the Vice Chair of the committee, to second the recommendation. This does not indicate that either I or he support the recommendation. Simply, this is a mechanism to enable it to be brought to a vote. So I move the recommendation. Can I please ask the Vice Chair to second?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I happily second the motion.
Thank you very much. Will the Democratic Services Officer please conduct the recorded vote?
Okay, so this is a recorded vote being taken on agenda item 5. Committee members are asked to vote for or against the recommendation before them, or by way of an abstention. Please ensure your video feed is live before declaring your vote. Councillor Ashcroft.
For.
Councillor Belbin.
For.
Councillor Irvine.
For.
Councillor Jaggard.
For.
Councillor Mugale.
For.
Councillor Pickett.
For.
Councillor Purdy.
For.
Councillor Rana.
For.
Councillor Sharma.
For.
And Councillor Smith.
For the consent.
Thank you. Okay, so the vote has been taken and it's unanimous for. I will now pass back to the chair.
Thank you. Planning application CR 2019 0646 ADP The Tree 103 High Street, Northgate, Crawley has been consented, subject to the conditions and set out in report PES 357A. Thank you. That moves us on, I believe, to agenda item 6, a planning application CR 2020 0012 LBC The Tree 103 High Street, Northgate, Crawley. Would the officer please introduce the report to the committee? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is the associated listed building consent application for the signage that you've just taken the decision on. This application comprises 2 signs that are actually due to be proposed to be attached to the building. So it is sign 1, as we noted before, on the modern part of the building, on the extension to the listed building, and it is sign 2, which is proposed on the western elevation. The first sign will be on the, as I say, the non-historic part of the building. It's not therefore considered that it has either a harmful impact on the character of that part of it or would cause any kind of impact on the actual historic fabric of the building. This sign here again has been designed to be more in keeping with its context, i.e. With this brick facade, using more traditional materials with the black metal letters, and it's also been designed with the line underneath it, which is designed to limit the number of screws that have to be put into the building so that there isn't much damage to the fabric of the building. On this basis, the application is considered to have an acceptable impact on the building, and the recommendation therefore is to grant listed building consent subject to the conditions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. We will now move on to discussion of the application. Members wishing to speak should turn on their cameras, please.
Councillor Pickett, did you wish to speak?
Only to say I think the new signage is fine. It's quite attractive, actually. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
So, there being no further questions or observations on the application, we will move on to the vote. The recommendation is to consent. I move the recommendation. Councillor Sharma, would you kindly second, please?
I will second the motion.
Thank you very much. Would the Democratic Services Officer please call the vote?
Councillor Ashcroft.
4.
Councillor Belbin.
4.
Councillor Irvine.
4.
Councillor Jaggard.
4.
Councillor Mugale.
4.
Councillor Pickett.
4.
Councillor Purdy.
4.
Councillor Rana.
4.
Councillor Sharma.
4.
Councillor Smith.
For the consent.
Thank you. So the vote has been taken with 10 votes for and 0 votes against, with no abstentions.
Thank you very much. Application number CR/2020/0012/LBC, The Tree, 103 High Street, Northgate, Crawley, has been consented, subject to the conditions set out in report PES 357B. We will now move on to agenda item 7, a planning application, a CR 2020-0462 FUL, a Barber warehouse, Northgate Place, Northgate, Crawley. Would the development manager please introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies whilst I get this slideshow working. Okay. Thank you, Chair. So this application is for a property formerly known as the Barber warehouse. which is shown edged red on the plan in front of you. It's located in Northgate Place in Northgate. As you'll see, to the southwest of it are some residential houses and gardens. To the southeast, you've got the row of shops which form Northgate Parade. To the north are properties in Hollybush Road, which have quite long gardens. To the northeast here is a garage block, and to the east are other commercial buildings, including an MOT centre and car sales business. Just to show you some photographs of the site, these two photos show the unit is a single-storey building with a flat roof. It has parking space to the front for approximately 3 vehicles, and you may just be able to make out the fence line behind the parked vehicles. This shows the entrance gates to a small service yard which is tucked behind the parking. You can see it better on the drawing on the right hand side. You can just see the fence line again there. And then in terms of the site context, the photograph on the left is a view back to the rear of the Northgate shops, and the application site is here on the right hand side. And the photograph on the right hand side is the view north towards the council garage block, and you'll see the parking area with 3 vehicles there at the moment, and the site behind. You also note the trees behind the buildings. Those are the trees in the properties of Hollybush Road. So the drawing on the screen before you now is the existing floor plan for the building. It amounts to some 255 square metres, and the floor space is currently laid out as small-sized offices, the premises being vacant since March 2017. And this application is to change the use of this building from office to a kitchen to prepare, cook and pack food for the distribution of that food to the homeless. I'll show you the proposed floor plan. See how the layout's changed. Okay. So this is a floor plan as proposed. The kitchen, as you'll see, is located centrally in the building, with a small element of office space retained to the front, and the rest of the space around the kitchen and the rest of the building used for storage. You'll see there's a refuse storage area in the bin yard behind the fence there. Proposal is for the kitchen to be in use every evening between 5 and 8 o'clock, with between 2 and 5 volunteers on the site. 3 parking spaces to the front would be occupied by a delivery van, which would be loaded at around 6:30 in the evening and would then leave to distribute the food within the town centre. Current agreed locations for distribution being Telford Place car park and the lay-by outside Mocker. There would be no food consumed on the premises and no visitors to the site other than the volunteers. As stated in the report, this is a revised application by the charity, as its first application was withdrawn. The applicants have sought to address the responses and concern received to the first application, and the current application is a new proposal and must be considered on its merits. As you will see from the report, it is not considered there is any objection in principle to the change of use from office. This new use will bring an old building back into use and address a community need. In terms of the impact of the use on nearby occupiers, these are set out in the officer's report. In respect of the new use, it should be noted that the general hours of use of the building are proposed to be limited to 3 hours a day in the early evening, with only 5 volunteers on the site at any one time. The distribution van would be loaded once in the early evening. The overall level of use and activity is not considered excessive in this area, which already has commercial car MOT uses and a petrol station nearby, along with other commercial uses in Northgate Parade. It is not considered that the level of activity proposed would harm the amenities of nearby residents, given the limited hours and the limited number of people on site. As stated in the report, the earlier withdrawn application had proposed visitors to the premises to consume food prepared. This is not proposed, and the building is intended for food preparation only. Officers consider that the proposed level of activity can be effectively controlled through planning conditions, including condition 2, which controls the building floor plan, as you see on the screen before you, condition 3, which is personal to the applicants, condition 4, which controls the use of the building, and condition 5, which limits the use of and the hours. With these controls, it's not considered there would be harm to nearby residents from this use. Another impact from the use could be odour, as in order to install the kitchen, it requires a new extract which needs a roof-mounted cowl. Just show you the elevation as proposed. Sorry, that's the wrong drawing. Try again. Let me get that up. Afraid I can't get the proposed elevation to load, but there is a small roof-mounted cowl proposed in the central portion of the roof here. And that's the only physical change to the building. The environmental health consider that odour can be controlled adequately via a condition, ensuring the filters are cleaned and maintained. These are conditions 6 and 7 as proposed in the agenda. It's also worth noting the relatively limited use of the extract, with cooking ceasing around 6:30 when the van is loaded and food distribution commences. Final impact to note is highways. The unit has sufficient space to meet its operational need in line with the SPD. The van would occupy 3 spaces and the intended volunteers would park nearby. Given limited hours and that these are outside the busy times for the nearby parade, it's not considered to have a negative impact on parking in the area. And you'll see that West Sussex haven't objected to the proposal. The number of volunteers on the site is also very limited. So in conclusion, overall, it is considered an appropriate use and as proposed to be operated by the applicant would be small scale, provide a significant community benefit and considered to have no harmful impact on the amenities of the area. Permission is recommended subject to the conditions set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McPherson. We will now begin consideration of the application. Please turn on your camera if you would like to speak. If I pause for a moment, Peter, before you speak, I do apologise to members of the public watching. We have had 2 statements submitted by members of the public, which I would now invite the Democratic Services Officer to read. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. We have had 2 statements on this application. The first is from a neighbour, Mr. Masood Ahari. I live on Boundary Road, Northgate, Crawley, West Sussex, and alongside many from Northgate, object strongly to the permission because it is so close to a heavily residential place and school. I have 2 young kids and I'm very concerned about this. The homeless kitchen is a very good idea, but needs to be in an industrial estate or town centre, please. Why not have it in a more affluent area such as Worth or Pound Hill? That's the end of statement number 1. Statement number 2 has been submitted by the applicant Giving Back Crawley. I'll begin the statement now. 24 letters of representation were submitted raising objection to our application, and we have read them all thoroughly. Most of the points raised had already been covered in our business plan, which was submitted and available on the public planning portal, and many overlapped and could be answered together. My name is Joanne Dines. I'm the chairperson of Giving Back Crawley, and I'm submitting this response to the objections raised. However, I would firstly like to address something that became apparent when reading the letters. The majority of our service users, who we refer to as guests, are not sleeping on the streets. They are in some form of temporary accommodation, but are still legally classed as homeless. Many of them are families, many of them have jobs, and almost none of them fit the negative stereotype portrayed in many of the objections. Location, potential local impact, and building suitability. Objection. Sorry, I've got a bit of feedback here. Let's see if I can correct that. Okay. Objection. The residential location of the building, the demographics of the neighbourhood, and the perceived likelihood of the guests that use the charity service congregating in the area around the building creating problems. Response. No one other than the volunteers working the session will have access to the site in any way. Our volunteers show excellent character and will be considerate of all local residents and businesses. Since March, we have successfully used a base kitchen to prepare and pack, then go out and deliver over 45,000 meals to homeless people during the pandemic. We've been operating using this method in 2 different council-owned buildings, in densely populated residential neighbourhoods, and we have not had anyone turn up requesting goods or support, nor any issues with or complaints from the local residents or other businesses in the area. In the previous 3 years, when we provided the service in the town centre, the food was also prepared off-site. At no point did any of the guests receive food directly from where it was prepared. Objection. Many of the local businesses raised concerns about increased traffic in an already incredibly busy road, causing congestion and noise nuisance in the area. Response. There will be no need for any other vehicles to access the site other than the one delivery vehicle, making a journey out at around 6:30 p.m. and back at around 8 p.m. each evening. All food and resources are brought by the volunteers themselves to their sessions. There will be no need for additional spaces or parking, as the building has dedicated parking spaces which are currently used by Northgate cars that will be used for the food delivery vehicle, which, as previously stated, will be the only vehicle requiring access. According to their objection letters, Northgate cars have 60 cars and customers visiting every day. The MOT centre is very busy, and the car wash company has at least 200 cars going through the service road a day. The petrol station is also extremely busy and often causes queues blocking the road. We cannot see a situation where the activity from the kitchen or the one delivery vehicle will make any noticeable impact on the traffic and noise in this already busy road. Regardless of the development, any use of the building going forward will result in an increase in traffic. Our operating model ensures that only one main vehicle will access the area, which would no doubt be an unlikely situation with other businesses. The operating hours of the kitchen are outside of normal business hours, and we are committed to working with local businesses and the community to ensure that any disruption is minimised. Operational objection. That the amended application is a ruse to get the building, then continue with the original proposal to feed guests on site. Response. We are a legitimate registered charity who is transparent in its intentions. Giving Back Crawley relies heavily on the local community for support and donations. Any attempt to circumvent the planning application and change the use of the building would be underhand and not conducive to our morals. We are aware that the previous application was set to be rejected due to residents' concerns, and so we adjusted our business model to account for this. We have no intentions of, nor would we be able to, set the kitchen up as previously proposed without following the application process, which would again be refused. The guests using the service, and nor will we be advertising where the food is prepared. The only reason guests could become aware of this is via continued media campaigns, none of which have been led or contributed to by Giving Back Crawley. Objection. The application does not specify the agreed feeding site locations. There is no list of these locations. This means the food truck could serve food from the front of the parade. Response. No food or essential supplies will be distributed directly from the building. Everything will be delivered to the locations agreed with the Council's Housing and Community Development departments, and there is no possible chance that any shopping parades will be requested by us, let alone approved. At present, 2 non-residential out-of-town centre locations have been agreed with both CBC and the relevant landowners. Both were thoughtfully considered by us and numerous other relevant parties to ensure the absolute minimum of impact on anyone else before being agreed on. Financial objection. Building not fit for purpose and has been vacant for over 15 years, the cost to repair the building and bring up to standards will be better spent elsewhere. Response. The funds available to the charity are a result of donations. It is independently run and does not rely on financial help from taxpayers. Ultimately, it's the legal responsibility of the charity trustees to ensure that its funds are being used most effectively. They take this responsibility very seriously, and the local residents can be assured that many other options have been explored over the past 3 years in an effort to guarantee this. We have already planned and budgeted for all required repairs to the building. Necessary repairs were identified using the Council's own scope of work, which was produced when their intention was to renovate the building themselves. We've had a team of builders and other contractors visit the site and have obtained the relevant quotes and charitable support to ensure the building will be fit for use. A baseline health and hygiene audit will also be undertaken as part of the financial condition of the building, and it will be subject to CBC's environmental health legislation. This will continue to be monitored in line with the legislations, and any issues would be dealt with as they would with any other food preparation business or establishment. End of the second statement, and that's all our statements for this application.
Thank you very much. We will now begin consideration. Please turn on your camera if you wish to speak.
Councillor Irvine. Oh, just unmute you.
Thank you very much. Well, we wouldn't really be considering this tonight if it wasn't for the the residents who've written in to raise objections to the application. Otherwise, it would have been dealt with under delegated powers. I've read all the letters as well, and some of them are very measured, some of them not so measured. Some of the objectors seem to be under the impression that the hours that the kitchen will be open are much longer than they will be in reality. For example, one person thinks they're going to be open till 10 o'clock, another till 11 o'clock. But I think that the response from the applicant is really, it would be enough to allay any residents' fears. And I'm speaking here as a member of the Planning Committee, but I'm also the Cabinet Member for Housing, and homelessness does form part of my portfolio, but I've not had any discussion on this application, and no one's consulted me on it, so I don't feel the need to declare an interest. But I can say that during this pandemic, I get my regular updates on the homelessness situation in Crawley, and Giving Back Crawley played a really valuable role in alleviating the effects of homelessness during this pandemic. So I really do hope that the committee will give permission for this. Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I too have had a look at the objections from the residents and others, and I do understand why people make these comments, because we're all apprehensive of change, and I think many of the neighbourhoods have people hanging around there on occasions that we would rather weren't there, and that applies, I think, across the town in my experience. And clearly some of these objections are not, as Councillor Irvine said, not necessarily up to date with this current version of the application. In terms of the conditions, it seems to me that officers' recommendations to condition the site such that it's only to be used up until 8 o'clock in the evening and primarily from 5 o'clock limits the scope of people going there in the first place. And the delivery van will actually leave at 6:30, which is a time at which activity around places like the MOT centre are going to be dropping off, I think, and the actual activity behind the shops there is going to be reduced significantly. And of course, it's going to 2 sites, both of which are not heavily used areas in terms of footfall, in Telford Place and Mocker. I also think that as this building is a small and kind of odd shaped building, it's been empty for 3 years, to have a use for it that actually works within it is probably something that's not going to come along very often. And again, I take Councillor Irvin's points about the good work that this charity does, that this organisation does. It's a really valuable contribution to the town, and I too will be supporting the recommendation to permit.
Councillor Belbin.
Thank you. All I was going to say, having looked at it and been round there and looked at the papers online, the only thing I was going to comment on, or perhaps ask the officer, and it may not necessarily be planning matters, but I think it's worth raising, is that the police raised a number of observations. I wouldn't call it objections or approvals, they were definitely observations, and 2 in particular were that they were recommending a CCTV or alarm system, or intruder alarm system, and or lighting in the area being the second one. I just wondered if the officer had any feedback from the applicant in respect of those particular observations from the police. Thank you.
Councillor Jaggard.
Thank you. I too was going to ask about the lighting in the area, because it is. Oh, it says my mic's muted. Is it muted, or am I okay?
No,
I'm okay.
you're not muted.
Okay, it says on my thing it's muted. Okay. So yeah, sorry. So I too was going to ask about the lighting down there, because it is quite tucked away around the back, and I did worry about that. But I generally think this is a really good use of an empty building, and I have read and noted the objections, and a lot of them are based about the food preparation, the noise, the smells, and all that sort of thing. But I've noted that in Northgate Parade we've got a bakery, a kebab, a tandoori takeaway, a Chinese takeaway, a Turkish restaurant, and a pub. So there is a huge amount of activity in that area anyway, and this is just for a very short amount of time. So you know, I can't see that it's going to make any greater noise or smell than any of the other places. So really, that's one thing. But as I say, the only other thing was the question about the security lighting and things. Thank you.
Thank you. Jean, could you please turn your camera on so that I can send you live to answer those comments? Lovely, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. In respect to the 2 comments about the CCTV and the alarm system, I think this may have been obviously aware that there was an earlier application for this site, which was a very different proposal with people actually visiting the site. I think the matter of the alarm system is a matter for the applicants. They will need to ensure that their premises is secure and you know, isn't subject to burglary and theft. And similarly, I think the CCTV is also the same. It's not that we're really encouraging any footfall down this as a result of this application. There are literally going to be like 5 volunteers to the site and the delivery van leaving from that. So it is a sort of service court location. And obviously, if the applicants feel that they need to put an exterior light on or any security, that's a matter for them. But I don't think it needs to be conditioned as part of the application. Thank you.
Are there any other matters from the members of the committee? Please turn your camera on if there are.
Councillor Jaggard.
Thank you. I would just like to follow that up, because it is for those people who are going to be working down there. It is a very, very small back alley type road, and I didn't think there was any street lighting down there, and I do have a little bit of concern about the employees the volunteers who are working down there, and there doesn't seem to be any street lighting. That's all, which is a county matter, highways matter, I guess.
Yes, Councillor Jaggard, it would be a matter for the Highway Authority to provide the street lighting. As I say, I don't think it's would be reasonable to impose any condition on the applicants to do anything along those lines. I say that building has been there a number of years, and the premises has been occupied before in the past, and the if you like, the street conditions haven't changed in that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McPherson. Any other questions or observations from members of the committee? Please turn on your cameras. I can't see any cameras going on, so all members of the committee having had an opportunity to speak, we will move on to the vote. A recorded vote on the application will be taken by the Democratic Services Officer on my behalf. The recommendation is to permit. I move the recommendation, and I kindly ask the Vice Chair to second that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do second the motion.
Would the Democratic Services Officer please call the vote?
Councillor Ashcroft.
4.
Councillor Belbin.
4.
Councillor Irving.
4.
Councillor Jaggard.
4.
Councillor Mugale.
4.
Councillor Pickett.
4.
Councillor Purdy.
4.
Councillor Rana, could you please turn your camera on? Okay, we'll come back to Councillor Rana. Councillor Sharma.
4.
Councillor Smith.
4.
Okay. Councillor Rana, if you could please turn your camera on so that we can do the vote.
I'm sorry about that. I got distracted by something. 4, please. Thank you.
Okay, so the vote has been taken with 10 votes for, 0 votes against and 0 abstentions on the recommendation.
Thank you. A planning application CR/2020/0462/FUL Barber Warehouse, Northgate Place, Northgate, Crawley has been permitted, subject to the conditions and informative set out in report PES/357C. We will now move on to agenda item 8, a planning application CR2020/052/TPO 5 Den Tie Pound Hill, Crawley. Would the planning officer please introduce the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application seeks consent to fell a protected tree. The tree is an ash in the rear garden of 5 Dene Tie. As you can see from the image on the screen, the trees in the rear garden is visible from Dene Tie to the south and also from the tops of the buildings to the west here. The photographs show the tree. As you can see, with nearly everything else around it, it's got leaves. This tree is in a fairly poor condition. The council's tree officers visited the site. The tree is showing signs of ash dieback and is likely to have a very limited lifespan. The tree, as it continues to deteriorate, is likely to have further failure of branches, of which there's some evidence already of them having fallen into the garden. The recommendation therefore is to fell this tree and then replace it with a silver birch a little bit further back into the garden. A silver birch being a tree that grows relatively quickly, doesn't have an enormous canopy, but will provide some replacement amenity for the tree that will be lost. The recommendation therefore is to fell the tree as set out in report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. I can confirm that no statements have been submitted by members of the public on this item. We will now begin consideration. Please turn on your camera if you wish to speak.
Councillor Pickett. Oh, sorry, just unmute you. Okay.
It doesn't look as if any members of the committee wish to speak on this matter. The recommendation is to consent. I therefore move the recommendation. Mr. Vice, would you kindly second?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do second the motion.
Thank you very much. Would the Democratic Services Officer please call the vote?
Sorry, this is a recorded vote being taken on agenda item 8. Committee members are asked to vote for or against the recommendation before them or by way of abstention. Please ensure your video feed is live before declaring your vote. Councillor Ashcroft.
For.
Councillor Belbin.
For.
Councillor Irving.
For.
Councillor Jaggard.
For.
Councillor Magali.
For.
Councillor Pickett.
For.
Councillor Purdy.
For.
Councillor Rana. Sorry, just unmute your microphone, Councillor Rana.
Sorry, for.
Councillor Sharma.
For.
And Councillor Smith.
For the consent.
Thank you. So the vote has been taken with 10 votes for, 0 votes against and 0 abstentions on the recommendation.
Thank you very much. A planning application, a CR/2020/0526/TPO 5 Dene, Pound Hill, Crawley, has been consented, subject to the conditions and informatives set out in report PES 357D. That moves us on to agenda item 9, a planning application CR 2020-0588 out. 42 and 44 Brighton Road, Southgate, Crawley. Can I please ask the planning officer to introduce the report? Thank you.
Hello. Thank you. Okay. So the application site is located on the eastern side of Brighton Road at its junction with Stonefield Close. It does contain a pair of semi-detached dwellings, numbers 42 and 44 Brighton Road. Number 42 has its access from Stonefield Close, and number 44 has its access from Brighton Road. The application seeks outline planning permission for the demolition of these dwellings and the erection of a Part 3, Part 4-storey residential building comprising 5 one-bed flats and 15 two-bed flats. Approval is sought for access and outline and for access and layout only at this outline stage, with appearance, landscaping and scale to be considered at the reserve matters stage. Some committee members may remember this scheme as it is a resubmission following the previously refused application, which related to a similar development. That application was refused and dismissed at appeal only on the grounds that it would not make appropriate provision for affordable housing. This current application now proposes 2 ground floor flats, 1-bed flat and a 2-bed flat, to be shared ownership affordable units. This is the only change to the previously submitted scheme to address the only previous reason for refusal. The proposal represents the redevelopment and the intensification of residential use of a site within the built-up area, and in principle it is considered acceptable. The street scene of Brighton Road is characterised by a mixture of block of flats, including Godolphin Court to the south, a 3-storey block of flats, Alexander Court, a 2-storey block of flats to the north, and Glendon House to the west, a 3-storey block of flats. To the east, along Stonefield Close, there are semi-detached bungalows. The proposed building would be positioned in the centre of the site, with the entrance facing onto Brighton Road. The proposed building, there would be 2 vehicular accesses, a small one onto Brighton Road, which will provide and serve a small parking area of 5 parking spaces, and the main parking area would be onto Stonefield Close that would serve 15 number of parking spaces. The front elevation of the building would be roughly in line with the front elevation of Godolphin Court, which is a 3-storey block of flats, and it is considered to be acceptable within this street scene. The proposed positioning of the building to the north would also be acceptable, given the fact that Alexander Court to the north and has a similar relationship between this court and the front elevation of the bungalows on the northern side of Stonefield Close in terms of the building line. It is also considered that the relationship between the proposed building and number 26 Stonefield Close to the east would be satisfactory, as the gap would be around 29 and 31.5 meters between the buildings, and there is also the existence of a substation between them. Regarding the impact on Godolphin Court to the south, a gap of 8 meters would be retained between the side elevation of these 2 dwellings. The existing planting trees would also be retained, and the indicative floor plan submitted so that the windows on the southern south side elevation could be obscure glaze to prevent overlooking and loss of privacy. Further details regarding this would be subject to consideration as a part of the reserved matters. Regarding Alexander Court, which is located on the northern side of Stonefield Close, there would be a road between the site and the side elevation of the two buildings. It is considered that the resultant relationship could be satisfactory, and it is really a typical relationship between properties where there is an intervening road, as there would be already a lower level of privacy due to existing public views of the side elevation of the neighbouring building. The proposed layout of the building would not encroach into the root protection area of any of the retained trees, and it is considered that there is an acceptable distance between the proposed dwelling and these tree canopies. Tree protection fencing would be is proposed around the other retained trees, and a condition of implementation of tree protection measures, including no-dig methods of laying hard standing, is recommended in this regard for the protected trees around these areas shown on the plan. The other matter of this outline application is the access. Regarding the access arrangement, West Sussex Highways raised no objection to this and the resultant visibility displays. The proposed access onto Stonefield Close would result in a change to the on-street parking spaces that form part of the control zone. This would be done under a traffic regulation order, as advised by West Sussex Highways. This removed parking bay here onto this new access would, however, be replaced in front of the reinstatement of the existing access into Stonefield Close to the northwest. West Sussex Highways also commented that it is not expected that the increase in the number of trips would have a detrimental impact on road capacity, given the existing movements on the local road network of Brighton Road and the negligible increase to vehicle trips in the peak times. As a result, the proposal would not have a severe cumulative impact on the operation of the highway network, and the principle of the intensification of the use of the site regarding highway capacity is considered to be acceptable. The proposal would meet the minimum car and cycle parking standards contained in the Council's Urban Design SPD and would therefore be in accordance with the local plan policies. West Sussex Highways also consider that the parking layout is acceptable in terms of size, numbers and manoeuvring within the site. Regarding the affordable housing requirements, and as a result of the dismissed appeal, this application proposed 10% of affordable housing as two shared ownership flats. This represents an improvement upon the absence of affordable housing in the previous application, is now in line with paragraph 64 of the NPPF and secures on-site provision. Whilst it is unfortunate that the scheme cannot deliver 40% of affordable housing, this has been justified in viability terms under the previous refused planning application. There has been no change in economic conditions since to suggest that the scheme has now become more viable. The proposal would make a small contribution now towards addressing Crawley's affordable housing needs. It has addressed the previous reason for refusal and appeal dismissal. Provision of this level of affordable housing can now be secured through a Section 106 agreement, and officers consider that it represents a satisfactory outcome. This Section 106 could also cover contributions in relation to open space and tree replacement and tree mitigation that the applicant has agreed to pay. Finally, the indicative design and massing shown on the submitted illustrative elevations so that could be acceptable given the surrounding area. The indicative floor plans also show that the proposal could provide a satisfactory living environment for future occupiers, subject to noise and space standards conditions. All these matters, along with drainage and sustainability, would be subject to further consideration at the reserved matter stage, and relevant conditions are recommended in this regard, as it can be seen on the committee report. In conclusion, officers recommend approval of this outline planning application, subject to the conclusion of a Section 106 agreement to secure on-site to affordable housing units and open space and tree mitigation contributions.
Thank you very much. There have been 4 statements submitted by members of the public on this item. Will the Democratic Services Officer please read the statements?
Thank you. The first statement is from Peter and Teresa Guyver, a neighbour to 42 and 44 Brighton Road. Dear members of the Planning Committee, we would like to raise our objections to the proposed development on Brighton Road. We believe we have very good reasons for objecting to this application. Most of the residents in Stonefield Close are over 65 and do not use the internet, so we are objecting on their behalf after consulting them. At the present time, at least 3 of the households have carers coming in a few times each day. This alone can cause parking problems. We would like the following to be looked at by the committee. Parking. There are 35 rooms to be built and only 20 parking spaces. This is unlikely to be adequate for the new residents and their visitors. These residents will be eligible to apply for permits, and this will mean even less spaces for the present residents to use. Loss of privacy. This will be a 4-storey building which is taller than any other nearby building and will overlook the gardens of 26, 25, 24 and 23 Stonefield Close. Structure of building. A block of flats set amongst our bungalows would be out of place in the area. We all have nice low identical walls. Design of building. There are a few blocks of flats in Brighton Road. These flats, because of their position, would appear to be mainly in Stonefield Close and therefore out of place. Road access. The main access to these flats will be from Stonefield Close, which is at present a relatively quiet road. Flooding. Flooding has already occurred at the end of the close several times due to drainage issues. This occurred again recently. Previous planning decisions and appeal decisions. Application CR 2019-0214 OUT. The previous application was rejected by the council and upheld at appeal. Not much has changed. We would like the above points to be considered when looking at this application. That's the end of the first statement. Second statement is from Sarah Oliver, also a neighbour of 42 and 44 Brighton Road. We, the Stonefield Close residents, wish to make you aware of a number of strong objections that we have with regard to the proposed development flats to be erected on the Brighton Road and adjacent to Stonefield Close after having examined the plans. As residents of Stonefield Close, this scheme will have a serious impact on our standard of living. Our specific objections are as follows. Height, size and scale. The height, size and scale of the development is extensive based on the plot size, and the building is not in keeping with the street scene of the surrounding area. It is too tall, larger than the other apartment blocks on the Brighton Road. Stonefield Close is a small close of bungalows. At the entrance to Stonefield Close is Alexandra Court, a small block of 2-storey residential flats with enough parking for the residents and visitors. Impact on neighbours and environment. The property will overshadow 26 Stonefield Close. Stonefield Close already has parking issues due to the bungalows being built in the 1950s and having narrow driveways. This would impact on dangerous traffic congestion and parking problems for both the residents at Alexandra Court and Stonefield Close. Traffic will be increased, pollution will be increased. Access to Stonefield is important for the elderly residents and will be restricted for ambulances and caregivers. Access to rubbish collections and deliveries will be restricted. Loss of light to the nearest bungalows. There needs to be a daylight and sunlight assessment closer to Alexandra Court. As the new building is due south of Alexandra Court, it will lead to loss of both, and this needs to be assessed as part of the application. The Planning Authority legally cannot reach a decision on this without the daylight sunlight report and the sections being submitted, and even if they are submitted, it is unlikely that they will show the relationship to be acceptable. Flooding has already occurred at the end of the close several times due to drainage issues. This occurred only last week. The privacy will be lost with the bungalows being overlooked. Access will be in Stonefield Close, causing not only initial building disturbance, but more people walking into the close where vulnerable people live. Noise will be increased in an area where many residents are elderly. Parking will become a serious problem. 20 flats and only 20 spaces. They will ultimately park in the close and cause congestion in our close and the Brighton Road. 20 spaces is not sufficient for the residents, not taking into account visitors. The section plans do not show the relationship across the road with the property based at Alexandra Court. The extended sections are required to show the proximity of windows, degree of overlooking, etc. The separation between windows in Alexandra Court south elevation and the new building's north elevation is way too short. For 3+ stories, it should be almost 30 metres, not 16 metres. We have measured the separation in the plan extracted below and it is 15.74 metres. The rule of thumb for 2-storey back-to-back properties is minimum 21 metres to protect amenity between facing bedrooms, and this is way lower and therefore totally unacceptable. There should be no bedroom or habitable windows facing the Alexandra Court flats on the north elevation other than at ground floor level. Parking and turning space for the new flats looks tight. Less flats are needed, which would free up space in the car park. The building is not in keeping with the street scene of the surrounding area. It is too tall. Loss of wildlife in the gardens. The junction is not safe. There has been an incident recently. The traffic on the Brighton Road is very busy when the rail crossing is down. The traffic builds up and makes access into and out of Stonefield Close extremely difficult. And the parking proposes 20 spaces for 14 2-bed flats. This is in no way sufficient. We would be grateful if the council would take our objections into consideration when deciding this application. End of the second statement. The third statement is from the applicant, Turnbull Land. Thank you for allowing me to make representations at this committee. The applicant has worked hard in conjunction with the planning officer and urban design officer to ensure that this scheme is suitable for the location. The scheme reflects the pattern of development along Brighton Road, which has seen the construction of blocks of apartments consistently over the last 30 years. The scheme, whilst 4 stories in part, is no taller than the neighbouring Godolphin Court, and considerable effort has been undertaken to address any issues surrounding perceived overlooking. All separation distances meet the council's requirements. The application seeks to address the sole reason for refusal of the last application, which was the provision of affordable housing. The scheme has been tested by a financial viability consultant, as well as our own, and their findings were that the scheme is unviable when providing the full policy requirement for affordable housing. However, by working together, the applicant and council, alongside the consultants, feel that it is possible to include 2 affordable housing units. Therefore, the application before you includes provision for affordable housing. The work undertaken on this application is reflected in the comprehensive committee report, which in this application has received a recommendation for approval of planning permission. This is exactly the type of development close to the town centre and transport links that should be encouraged, and whilst only 20 units, every unit built in the urban area eases pressure to release greenfield sites. I hope that the committee supports its officers in their view that this should be approved. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the officers in planning and housing for bringing this application in good time to the planning committee, given the extraordinary times. Thank you. Chris Maunders from Turnbull Land. End of the third statement. The fourth and final statement has been submitted by the ward councillor, Councillor Flack. Dear members of the planning committee, as the ward member for Southgate, I am raising my objections to the proposed development on Brighton Road. After having spoken to residents in nearby areas, I believe there are a number of valid planning grounds for refusing the application. Before I go through each of the considerations, I would like to emphasise the strength of concern of residents, notably in ensuring carers are able to access their homes to provide essential care. Firstly, I'd like to begin by highlighting that this site does not form part of Crawley Borough Council's current local plan, nor the version currently under development, and the Council continues to have an adequate 5-year land supply. Consequently, development of this site is not required to meet the town's housing needs at this time. In terms of planning grounds for refusal, I believe the following should be considered by the committee. Overlooking a loss of privacy. The building will be the only 4-storey structure in the area, not only taller than the adjacent buildings, but with a smaller parking area than Godolphin Court, resulting in it overlooking the garden of many Stonefield Close residents. Parking. Despite the increase in parking provision, no parking has been provided and only 1 bay has been allocated per flat, 20 units, despite the total number of rooms being 35. The significant growth in adults remaining at home for longer and declining single-family occupancy means that it is unlikely that this number of bays will be sufficient to meet the total parking needs of the flats. This 1-to-1 ratio is not sufficient, as evidenced from personal experience, as in most households there were multiple adults plus visitors. Even with the majority of residents being commuters, cars were used in the evenings and weekends for shopping and transporting children. In addition, the site forms part of a controlled parking zone, and the residents of these flats will be eligible to apply for permits, putting a strain on the area's already exhausted parking supply. Disabled persons access. Worryingly, there is 0 parking provision for disabled residents or visitors, despite 22% of the population having some form of disability. Speaking from personal experience, it removes any dignity to not be able to use an accessible space. Loss of trees. There are mature trees on this site which will be lost as part of the construction of these flats. Layout and density of building. The structure is a block of flats, the highest density form of housing, being placed adjacent to bungalows, the lowest density form of housing. Not only is this out of keeping with the area, but will put a far greater strain on infrastructure. Design, appearance and materials. While this section of Brighton Road does contain several blocks of flats, the properties are, to all intents and purposes, located on Stonefield Close. This road almost entirely comprised of 1-storey bungalows of vastly different design to that of the block of flats set out in the application, backing onto a conservation area. This will clearly be detrimental to the visual amenity of the area. Road access. The principal access to the site will be from Stonefield Close, a narrow road. This development will result in a significant increase in vehicle movements into what is currently a quiet road. Previous planning decisions, including appeal decisions. Essentially, the same proposal was recently rejected by the Council, a decision which was upheld at appeal. The changes made are incredibly minor, ignoring the great range of problems outlined both at the same time and since. Thank you for your consideration on these matters. The end of the final statement. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We will now begin consideration of the application. Would members wishing to speak please turn on their cameras?
Councillor Peter Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened very carefully to the comments, particularly Councillor Flack's and the residents. I think the issue we have, and it is clearly in the report, is that we've rejected this application once on the basis of non-provision of affordable housing. The inspector supported that rejection on appeal, and now we have an application that's, as several commentators have said, is exactly the same, although it now includes affordable housing. So I'd like advice from officers, but I think it would be a difficult planning decision if we were to reject it again, now that it's met the original refusal request. In terms of the general issues about, primarily parking is the issue, I think. There is a CPZ. I think the units in Stonefield Close, people's homes there, have parking off-road for at least 2 cars per site, and there's 20 now to be provided for these 20 apartments, which is 1 per apartment. I thought that the diagram we were shown included a disabled space, but I'm not sure, perhaps that could be confirmed. And I think in terms of the overall size and scale and massing, I think that is not part of the outline permission. It's more about the principle and the highway access. So subject to those questions, I'd be interested to hear what the officers feel about those points before I decide whether to support the officer recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Belbin. Oh, just unmute yourself, please, Councillor.
Sorry, I do apologise. I'm slightly in agreement with Councillor Smith on a couple of points there. A ratio of one to per flat for car parking is actually quite generous compared to some of the other ones which have come up recently, to be totally fair, no matter how inadequate that may be. Well, we had one recently which had less than 0.5 because it was got through. That's another issue altogether. My other question really for the officer, which is slightly turning into another thing Councillor Smith was alluding to, is I did go to the appeal document, the appeal rejection notice. I read the appeal rejection notice, and as far as I can see, the objections of the inspector, why he turned it down, all appear to have been met, albeit the affordable housing is possibly the barest minimum. I would just ask, in the officer's opinion, if Dimitri feels that you know all the objections to the appeal have been met. Thank you.
Councillor Jaggard.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a couple of things. When the officer was explaining the report, she did mention about obscured glass windows, and I just want to confirm that they are on the south elevation towards Godolphin Court. On the plans, it does look like the windows on that elevation. There are also some that also stick out and face east and west, and I just want to confirm whether those are due to be obscured or not. I realise this is an outline, but the officer did mention the obscured glass. So that was point one about the obscured glass. The second is, can you just please confirm also on the site plan, which we were shown, it did say it does show a 31.5 metre gap from windows on the east elevation towards the bungalow, which is over, I believe, the required amount for window to window, and this is to the side of the bungalow, so it's not even window to window. So overlooking, I didn't really think was a problem. The other comment, very much picked up by the previous two councillors, was, you know, last meeting we were approving an application for 121 flats with only 58 parking spaces, and it just seems that this application has got 20 parking spaces for 20 flats. So I'm not quite sure that parking can be a grounds for turning it down. You know, we've done other applications with far fewer spaces, and it does also show a disabled space on that plan. Yeah, and that previously the reason for the refusal was the affordable housing, and that does seem to be addressed somewhat that compared to last time. So it's just those two questions really, and that comment. Thank you.
Councillor Ashcroft.
Thank you. What does concern me is, I mean, I used to represent Southgate, so I know this patch very, very well, and especially Stonefield Close. It concerns me how much we are cramming into this part of Crawley. It just seems overdevelopment to me again after another big development in the area. And I understand when they were saying about it protects Greenfield, but at the same point, residents who already live in this part of the town don't particularly want to be overdeveloped as well. And I do agree with their objections on that ground. I know that's maybe not a planning reason for objection, but I have to say, I agree with them because I disagree with this over cramming and putting in so many people into such a small space without increasing the number of GP surgeries, without increasing, I know it says about localities to schools. Again, nothing like that's increasing in this area, but we seem to be cramming more and more people in, and it does concern me.
Councillor Sharma.
I think I have a similar concern that it is an area which is already well represented by the number of housing that we've been having in there, and I think it's been stated that this is not part of the plans that we have made. So it's having 2 flats as affordable housing is not going to make any difference to our ratio of wanting affordable housing. On the other hand, the difficulty that we face by the residents, I think one needs to understand that all of those people in that area have bought their houses, they are bungalows, and people buy bungalows for a special need, which is to get the privacy, to get the little sunshine, and it is an area that I'm the board member for as well, and people enjoy the greenery, the sunshine, and the privacy on that court. And it's already been overlooked by lots of traffic coming on the Brighton road. And yes, rightly said, when the barriers are down, and I've tried turning left, right on that road there, it is virtually impossible. And with trains getting more and more, those barriers going down all of the time, it is a nuisance. And with additional housing in that area, there has been no compensation in terms of additional doctor surgeries, additional schools, etc., etc., etc. I think the impact on the structure itself and is far too much, and I think we need to at some stage look at the environment which is worth living for the residents who are local. Yes, I'm sure the worry seems to be if we refuse, we'll go to appeal and we'll lose the appeal. I think, is that the only reason why we need to worry is losing the appeal? I think we as councillors owe it to our residents to look after the interest, and this is one of those reasons, one of those places where the residents are saying to us, look at us, look at what you're putting us, and it's a monstrosity. I mean, it's such a big building compared to the other flats on both sides of it, and I think we need to look at that very, very seriously. And I would ask my fellow councillors to take that into consideration when they come into the vote. Thank you.
Councillor Irvine.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry if I missed this in the case officer's report, but we, I believe on page 49, we're awaiting comments from West Sussex Highways. Have we had any comments yet?
Okay, if I could just ask Demetra to turn her camera on so that she can respond to the queries. Thank you.
Yes, so the first one, it is, yes, the previous refusal and dismissed appeal, it was only on affordable. So members should really give significant weight to that decision. And if new reasons for refusal would be introduced now, then the council is really open to cause, as previously no other objections and reasons for refusal were used to refuse the application. The proposed site layout does show one disabled space, and this is in accordance with Council's adopted urban design SPD. Also, yes, this application is for outline. It is outlined for access and layout, so scale and design and matters of appearance they should be considered at the reserve matter stage, and they cannot really form a refusal reason on this planning application. Regarding it, as this is outlined, on the south elevation about the obscure glaze comment in the officer's report and the presentation, that is one indication that it could be that the proposal could be satisfactory subject to design considerations at the reserve matter stage. The plans, the indicative floor plans, because at this stage they are only illustrative, they do show that the south elevation, they could be obscure glazed. To the east and west, they are not shown as obscure glazed, but as previously said, the distance, it will be more than the councils, it will be 31.5 meters between rear elevation of the proposed building and side elevation of the bungalows, which does exceed the council's urban design SPD. Regarding the overdevelopment of the site, we do have NPPF that it does in reality seeks intensification of sites that they are within, that they could be used efficiently and appropriately to deliver housing. Regarding comments about the GPs and school, the proposal would be subject to seal payment, that these contributions could go towards these facilities. I think the last comment was on highways. Yes, we did receive their comments, and they did confirm that as nothing has changed in relation to access and layout, the previous comments, they do stand.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions or observation from members of the committee? If you would like to speak, please turn on your camera.
Councillor Irvine.
Yes, sorry if I'm asking a very obvious question, but what were the West Sussex Highways comments under the previous application? I'm sorry, I haven't got that to hand.
Yes, so they didn't raise objection to the access and the result of visibility displays. They did think that the parking layout does have the sufficient, it is of a size to accommodate the manoeuvring within the site. Regarding the access, they did say that that it is not expected that the increase in the number of trips would have a detrimental impact on the road capacity, given the existing movements on the local road network of Brighton Road, and they do think that there would be a negligible increase of 4 vehicle trips in the peak times, which they do not think that that could be a severe cumulative impact on the operation of the highway network. And they did recommend conditions regard to have the access, the vehicle parking, cycle parking as per the proposed plans, and a construction management plan as well. And all these recommended conditions, they are also recommended in the officer's report.
Thank you very much. Any further thoughts, comments, observations or questions before we move to vote? I don't see any cameras going on, so all committee members having had the opportunity to speak, we will move on to the vote. I need to advise members of the public who are watching this evening that unfortunately Mike Pickett Ward Councillor for Southgate has had to leave the meeting. Therefore, the vote will be only 9 committee members rather than 10. The recommendation is to permit, and I move the recommendation, and noting as previously, persons moving the recommendation, namely the chair, persons being asked to second the nominations, namely the vice chair. This is to enable a vote to be taken in an orderly fashion and does not automatically indicate their consent. Councillor Charmer, vice chair, would you please second the recommendation?
Thank you, Chair. In the same circumstance, I second.
Thank you. Would the Democratic Services Officer please call the vote?
Thank you. So this is a recorded vote being taken on agenda item 9. Committee members are asked to vote for or against the recommendation before them or by way of an abstention. Please ensure your video feed is live before declaring your vote. Councillor Ashcroft.
Against.
Councillor Belbin.
For.
Councillor Irvine.
For.
Councillor Jaggard.
For.
Councillor Mughali.
Against.
Councillor Purdy.
For.
Councillor Rana.
For.
Councillor Sharma.
Against.
Councillor Smith.
For.
Okay, so the vote has been taken with 6 votes for, 3 votes against, and 0 abstentions. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Planning application CR 2020 0588 OUT 42 and 44 Brighton Road, Southgate, Crawley has been permitted subject to the conditions and informatives set out in report PES 357E. That moves us on to agenda item 10, the supplemental agenda. There are no supplemental agenda items for this evening. That brings the business of the Planning Committee to a conclusion. I'd like to thank the committee members for their attendance. I'd like to thank the officers for their support and their questions, and to members of the public watching, thank you very much. Have a good night. I declare this meeting closed at 21:13 hours. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good evening,
everybody.
folks.
Ciao.
Good night.